Welcome, everyone. This is an online event of the EU Institute for Security Studies to discuss how we can shield democracy through cognitive security. My name is Nadia Kovalchikova. I am a senior analyst on transnational security and director of Countering Foreign Interference project. And I am joined here by excellent speakers, Maria Jontén, Senior Project Manager at the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency. Welcome, Maria. As well as my colleague, Ondrej Ditrych, a Senior Analyst on Russia and the Eastern Neighbourhood. Hello, Ondrej. So we are here today because we all know that this is somehow the week of democracy protection, defense of democracy. On the 12th of November, the European Democracy Shield joint communication has been released. Yesterday, we had a commemoration of the Day of Struggle for Freedom and Democracy since 36 years commemoration in Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, so both in Czech Republic and Slovakia. Today and tomorrow, there is also the first European Parliament Forum on Democracy. So we really have democracy all around us. At least we are talking a lot about it, but we are also very much aware how we cannot take it for granted and how we do need to continue to protect it, to support it, and to continue our efforts to also build resilience through cognitive security. And I'd like to dive into this discussion with a definition, so we are all on the same page, as we do know that this concept is perhaps less known to everyone. We talk a lot about disinformation, about information manipulation or foreign information manipulation and interference, FIMI, but we speak less about cognitive security per se. And in the recent brief we have co-authored at the EUISS, we try to bring to the light a little bit more this conceptualization of cognitive security as the protection of human perceptual and decision-making processes from external manipulation, which we consider a useful approach to address vulnerabilities. Maybe perhaps many of you who are also watching us are already familiar with the NATO conceptualization of cognitive warfare since the early 2000s, where we wanted to move from that conceptualization a little bit, from focusing on enemy tactics, that especially this concept looked at in quite a detail, to the EU's widening security deficits, especially to zero in on the psychological vulnerabilities that are exploited by hostile actors, and in particular cognitive biases and emotional contagion. And here we are trying to really present how we can build resilience when we integrate this understanding of protection of these cognitive perceptions and behavior from this manipulation. So here I would like to give word first to Ondrej to also dive a little bit deeper into what we have explored in the brief and why does it matter to think of these tactics and responses in terms of cognitive security.
Thank you, Nadia, very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe first of all, thanks Nadia for bringing up the anniversary of the Velvet Revolution in 1989, which we lived through as compatriots still. I think this anniversary in the Czech Republic, my country of origin, was particularly interesting even for our debate today, because it showed how the very meaning of democracy becomes increasingly contested, and in and through these events, this contestation of surfaces at times, and also how sort of the historical, the collective memory and interpretation of basically the founding event of the modern democracy of the Czech nation as a member state can also be contested. And of course, these contestations are not necessarily manufactured by outside adversarial actors, but they can and often are to be exploited. So they form part of this landscape in which the contestation in our democracies can take place, and it's being exploited to weaken those democracies. That being said, as an introduction, let me get to your question or the task. And this draws on the brief, I should say, that we authored together with our colleague as well. And the point about cognitive security that we make in the brief, and that I would like to highlight in this kind of introductory remarks, is that, of course, now is not the first time in history that human mind has become a target of foreign adversaries, but something does change, and something is new. Altering human cognition for strategic ends, weaponizing brain science, biotechnology, or exploiting the huge trove of big data on and from the social media to conduct advanced social engineering, also leveraging AI-backed analytics. This is something that cuts deeper than ever before to I would argue, the very foundations of our social orders. So it's no longer only about politics, if you will, but it's about polity as such, our communities. And unlike, let's say, more conventional propaganda or even disinformation, these new tactics leveraging new tools like systemic disinformation, instilling false collective memories, information overload, confusion, helped or facilitated by coordinated mass inauthentic behavior. These deepfakes and other complex counterfeits sort of reach beyond manipulating individual at key decision points, or in particular organizational settings, which is where the concept of cognitive warfare has its genesis in this military context, when it's about confusing military organization and making them incapable to respond in situations of military crisis, if you will. And to better comprehend this evolving challenge that we are faced with, I believe we need, and I would like to come back to this maybe a little later, we of course need solid empirical understanding of what is going on. We need to be able to connect the dots, not only across different countries and member states and partners, but also different theaters, but also. And I think this is our key argument that we make in our brief, is that we also need this kind of conceptual update, if you will. And just to dig a little bit deeper, to substantiate the argument about this change that is upon us, we already see how, for example, AI can be leveraged to confuse, both saturating information space, forcing reliance on cognitive shortcuts, right? How it can be used to simulate collective sentiments on social media that are not real but fabricated, or how large language models can be used to generate noise that confuses and produces these overloads. We can also see how the AI can be leveraged to corrupt, how, for example, campaigns like CopyCop use ChatGPT to subtly alter legitimate media content en masse and on scale that we couldn't really contemplate in not so distant past. We see campaigns like Doppelganger, right, illustrating innovative ways in which information space can be penetrated through cloning legitimate media and government sites. We see, and I think this is perhaps not so revolutionary, but again, what is different is the scale, because of the increasing contestation, democratization of knowledge, ability to communicate at distances, this kind of contestation of history, of the collective memories. We see Russia, of course, manufacturing and weaponizing fake collective historical memories targeting, of course, its own domestic, audiences through these tightening ideological screws, penetrating, educational institutions to maintain sort of legitimacy for the government, but of course also targeting international audiences. For example, in order to facilitate dissociation from Ukraine by denying its claim to nationhood and sovereignty as a value which Russia claims to champion in other contexts, in plural South, for example. Or we see these fabrications of history intended to confirm the position, confirm in quote unquote, of Russia as a victim and defender fighting Western, again, quote unquote, imperialist policies. So in these narratives that we see disseminating, the West, the West is not only responsible for the current war and is in war with Russia. We should never forget that this is how the Kremlin actually sees that. But in sort of Russia's official rewriting of history, it's the West that is actually responsible also for the descent of the Iron Curtain after the World War II, for example. So we see these changes, and I think, and the brief that we collectively put together tries to make that case, that the framework of cognitive security is adequate to capture this, that it's a useful conceptual update. It's not only about putting the old wine in new bottles, but it can actually sort of sharpen our thinking and bring clarity to this incredibly complex and evolving challenge. Because it, I think, takes our field of vision, in a way, it broadened it and it focuses it on issues that go sort of beyond addressing creation and consumption of intentionally misleading information. I mean, this would be the, let's say, traditional propaganda, or more familiar, FEMI. And it focuses our attention rather on the risks associated with processing of information in the interplay of a priori heuristics and interpretive narrative frames. So it contains tactics of manipulating information intake to stimulate cognitive shortcuts, dissociation, or motivated reasoning that is driven by aims other than accuracy or sort of representative truth, if you like. It also is intended to stimulate emotional responses to events, right? And ensuring that their sort of so-called spontaneous interpretations, which are not so spontaneous, actually fall within a certain predictable and ideally also sort of desirable space, right? So these tactics that we see, and we need to find appropriate response to, grounded, anchored in our society's liberal values, do not just reshape sort of the truth formation, contestation, if you like, underpinning the liberation process in democratic societies. They target the cognitive faculties of individuals who interact in this terrain by seeking to create sort of powerful filters for processing reality. So it's not about manipulating the landscape so much as about creating these filters of cognition. Right. And the tactics, and I'm getting to my penultimate point, and I will not take too much time. The tactics and actors in Russia's sort of cognitive war machine are diverse, and they have their own, sometimes very particular agendas. I think the SDA behind the Doppelganger campaign is a case in point, but I'd say they follow this sort of single broad strategic direction in which each convert to this sort of parallel reality that they together create, where the targeted individuals get to spend their time and where their consciousness is formed in a sort of ongoing way, advances Russia's geopolitical objectives and weakens its opponents or alleged enemies' will and ability to resist. Now, the last point I'd like to make is that in our understanding, cognitive security can usefully be seen as a twin of social resilience, right? So where resilience is sort of more of a collective property that allows for adaptation and continuity in face of shock, of adversity. Cognitive security concerns more sort of individual capacities and faculties. So it also helpfully counters sort of technological determinism, if you will, that has burdened this information research, and which perhaps over focuses on algorithmic structuring of content. No, this kind of cognitive security approach is, I think, a good counterpoint to that in so far as it's intended to emphasize sort of individual human predispositions, as well as, let's say, the structural, temporal, and spatial context in which information content is consumed, amplified, and even co-produced. So I will stop here and happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ondrej, for stepping here for now. You have really opened a lot of streams for thought and further discussion, seeing how these issues of cognitive insecurity or these threats to cognitive security are really cutting very deep into the individual's identity and the core values, and how collectively we have also been exposed even more due to the scaling up of this techniques and tactics and procedures addressing our minds through technology as well and social media platforms. And we already have some questions coming in on that front, and we'll address that throughout the discussion later on as well. But you also went beyond the EU, right? How this is not only an issue for the European Union, but that there is a geopolitical dimension of this as well, and other countries have been also tackling these issues and perhaps even developing some tools and expertise on that front that could be useful. And we will discuss also that in our conversation further on. But now I'd like to turn to you, Maria, because you are bringing already some expertise from one of the member states of the EU. You specifically are here also representing the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency. You also have other agencies to fight against this information manipulation or cognitive manipulation as part of more of a total defense approach. And we are seeing increasingly more that this is not only an issue of different communication or algorithms. This really goes much further in our different 13 domains. And we were initially also going to be joined by a colleague from Center of Excellence who have really addressed these issues across 13 domains. But unfortunately, he was unable to join us. But you are here with us, and you can perhaps tell us a little bit more about where does this psychological defense fit into this total defense, and why does it matter to address these issues from the psychological perspective?
Thank you, Nada, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm also very thankful for inviting me to share my views and the Swedish perspective on total defense and how we try to find ways to combat, prepare, and also build resilience in this regard. I will start off presenting to you some ideas and thoughts on a broad perspective from Sweden as being a new NATO ally and at the same time a EU member state. And then coming back to more concrete examples on what we do and how we think in this regard. So I hope this can give you some food for thoughts and hopefully a good discussion and dialogue. I'm also looking forward to further questions and to discuss this with you later on in this event. But I would like to start off out from that resilience is the foundation of deterrence and the decisive factor in whether it can withstand coercion, hybrid activities, and outright attacks. From our experience of Russian drone incursions over EU and allied territory, not at least in the northern part where I live, sabotages of critical infrastructure and cyber-enabled disinformation targeting elections. Sweden will go for an election next year, 2026, and we had quite a bit of experience during our NATO membership procedure. Threats are cascading, combining and exploiting layers in our democratical societal structures. And we have made a shift from planning and preparing out from all hazards approach to worst case perspective and outmost for war planning. Hybrid adversaries targeting core values, belief systems rather than bunkers, undermining trust in institutions, and polarizing societies and hindering mobilization during crisis. Out from this changing security environment, Sweden took the decision in 2015 to reinforce our total defense again, that we torn down out from the peace belief in the 90s and early 20s. Sweden will therefore bring back a knowledge construction that we used to have out from the Second World War and now rebuild it for a modern society. And that is something that I will come back to. And in this regard, we have also decided jointly with our Finnish neighbors to join the NATO alliance in 2023. So this must be seen in a whole of government approach and in what the security environment that we have been in since nearly 10 years or even more. I would also like in this presentation to stress NATO and EU have each developed their own complementary approaches, where both jointly provide us with a great toolbox to use all from regulations, directives, for example, the NIS directive, the CERA directive, we have Joint Research Center, we have ERCC, we have EUISS, and the NATO construction of the 7 baseline requirements, and also cybersecurity, financial sector, energy, and other sectors of great importance that together, collectively, build the resilience and make our platform for planning and build resistance to all these threats that we are facing today. Together, all these EU and NATO regulations and instruments provide us with elements of comprehensive framework, and I would really like to underline this. This is also something that is very important for a country as ours, being a new ally, but at the same time being part of the European Union for a long time, to combine the different tools that we are given and to use them in the best manner in a new construction within our society, all from the very top to the very bottom, to make use for our people to resist and combat hybrid threats. Practitioners and scholars have argued consistently that the more capable societies are withstanding disruptions, the fewer options adversaries have to exploit the public-private sphere, civil-military cooperation, key investments, and treating disinformation as an operational threat rather than a side issue becomes very central. EU analytical depth, cyber and energy regulations, operational mechanisms, and interpreting them through the systematic lens of the core model. This gives a great fundament for Europe to step up and build resilience equal to the threats that we are facing. And what I've been working through as an example in this regard is through war games, exercises as a great tool for planning, testing, further exploring, and most important, create networks between different stakeholders. And I would really like to underline this tool as a very useful tool for increase our awareness and build resilience through shared knowledge and shared experiences. We have done at the Swedish Defence University jointly with MSB that I'm presenting right now and the Swedish Armed Forces and other international colleagues and partners. We have conducted a series of games, the High North Deterrence game, focusing on the Arctic and High North and the northern part of Europe, and the Horizontal Escalation game that has shown that even structured frameworks can falter under pressure when attribution, intelligence sharing, and situational awareness lag between institution and mechanism and states. And some of the key findings in these regards out of the exercises that we have conducted is that deterrence and resilience requires a holistic cross-sectorial coordination approach. Strategic independence between regions is growing, and we also need to emphasize the gaps in NATO and EU synergy, but also, of course, in relation with US as an important partner over time and in history for the European context. We need to integrate tools across cyber, energy, and info ops and mobility, and validate war games as a tool for anticipating future strategic shocks. Joint exercises, as I earlier mentioned, is really a great cross-institutional cooperation where we can close the loop, ensuring that our paperwork come into practice as exercises provides platforms for test, further explore, and validate capabilities. So to resist Russian hybrid activities, we must move beyond documentation to share practice, which are needed in crisis, simulations, and cross-sectorial and public-private rules. NATO and EU can combine political urgency with regulatory precision, creating resilience cycle that is interactive, adaptive, and responsive to changing security environment. As we all know, these are the challenging times, and the security situation continues to deteriorate. And therefore, I will now very briefly move over to the Swedish total defense construction that we have reinforced, we have developed, and we're still developing, and try to be as flexible as possible due to current situation and current development around us, but at the same time create a stable fundament for the population in Sweden, because after all, the population in Sweden and in Europe, this is what we all work for. So as an example of this, a few weeks ago, the Swedish MSB Director General, together with the Supreme Commander, signed an important document that representing an agreement between the highest level of civil and military leadership in Sweden. The document outlines a joint planning assumption for total defense, 2025 to 2030 to establish a planning guide for all actors involved in total defense preparations, spanning from local, regional, national, and international entities for both government and non-government actors, and is an unclassified document. And that is also very important in a shared knowledge to bring people on board on this trip and to improve our capabilities and resistance jointly. So we have therefore addressed different scenarios and cases that described military armed conflict and what needs to be done and what areas needs to be focused on the Swedish society. And where does the psychological defense fit in all these? Well, Sweden decided to reinforce also the Agency for Civil Defense. So we have one agency that is specialized and focusing in particular in this field of area. But at the same time, we also have a Minister for Civil Defense. And the combination on having a top-level Minister for Civil Defense, an agency with a special responsibility on a cross-sectorial issue, and at the same time put special focus that psychological defense and combating disinformation is a cross-sectorial approach that has to be into each and every sector within the Swedish total defense construction. So it's a cross-cutting topic. It can't be seen as a topic in itself only, even though it needs, as we heard earlier, its definitions and its specific space. I will give you very few examples on how we concrete have done this.
Could be Maria, because this has been such a comprehensive overview already. Could you save those couple of examples?
Definitely,
sorry. Part, because I think we can really now proceed to this discussion and more back and forth between us before we even address the questions that are really flowing in, and that's excellent because we see there is a lot of interest and people are curious about these concepts of psychological defense and cognitive security. So just to follow up on, you have described very well already within this cross-sectorial approach, how there needs to be local levels, top-down and bottom-up combinations of interactions, and especially also this very concrete example where you see that the shared experiences through the exercises and through these different workshops together are really beneficial to developing more functional and practical complementary measures. You even mentioned an EU-NATO way of cooperation, how to address these psychological threats. So based on all of this that you also mentioned, in addition to what Ondrej, you have spoken about earlier, let's go exactly to these examples, concrete examples. Where do we see that this is really scaled up operations, this cognitive vulnerabilities, the exploitation by hostile actors has scaled up, and how do we also see it as a more global issue? We will see, if we speak about the security issues, the resilience issue, the maybe strategic communication issue, where does this overlap and how best to approach it? So Ondrej, building on your expertise as well, especially Russia and Eastern Neighbourhood, but also your recent work on other parts of Europe, where do you see that this playbook of hostile actors, you can focus on Russia or in comparison to others perhaps as well, is similar across theaters? And how is this cognitive dimension being part of that playbook?
Sure. Thanks, Nadia. And I think in part that also may answer some of the questions that are already flowing in, as you said. So I'd say, this playbook, Russia's hybrid playbook, it has sort of an evolving core. It's also tailored in its application to specific conditions in specific theaters, and this indeed accounts for change, for variation. But it is being applied, and Russia is learning from how the tactics, the campaigns that the various actors, which we can see as being part of this, somewhat heterogeneous hybrid assemblage, it's not a simple hierarchical structure that it encounters. So in that sense, this takes me back to also what I said in the beginning. I believe that we need this kind of conceptual update, and that cognitive security can provide some sort of helpful input for that. But we also need very solid and ongoing and evolving, empirical understanding, and this kind of shared security picture across different theaters. And I think here we still have a potential to cooperate, potentially even coordinate more, both within the EU and also with partners from the high north, from Svalbard and the Arctic down, to Moldova and Armenia. And just to be very concrete, I think this is where we actually see now how some very similar tactics are being already transplanted. Something that ultimately did not work for Russia, as it tried to manipulate the successive elections in Moldova over the past year, and the constitutional memorandum anchoring the ambition to join the EU. But we see how very similar tactics already appear to be used in Armenia, which awaits a very important parliamentary vote next June. Popping up these fake media sites, the smear campaigns about corruption and sexual offenses, these deep fakes. And this is, I think, by the way, where the cognitive dimension comes to the fore. But some of this, in the case of Moldova, of course, can be related to more conventional, and things change so fast, but something that we are more familiar with, electoral interference, buying votes, through these illicit flows, of course, also leveraging sort of, let's say, cryptocurrency. So there is a degree of innovation there, but in a way, it's kind of something rather conventional. But we also see these deep fakes, which really do not seem to be really, I would say, intended, to be trusted. They are sort of bizarre and grotesque sometimes. Some of these accusations, that were leveled at Maya Sandu, for example, they really kind of verge on the grotesque, but they somehow blur this line between what is credible and what is not, and they create this fog, of course, in which individuals have to make sense of the world, and makes it more difficult for them. So I think here we see obvious similarities, but it's not only about these two countries. It's not even about, let's say, the Black Sea region, where we now speak a lot about the need to look at the region comprehensively when it comes to security. But I think we actually need more sort of transregional perspective here as well.
And this transregional and the cross-sectorial approach, I want to also combine indeed with one question that I think is here about the responses, because you just mentioned that in Armenia, in this pre-electoral phase, which we do know that we need to address much earlier than the elections take place. So now we are there over half a year prior to this parliamentary vote. But you already mentioned that there has been this operations, more of them on the fake media sites, the corruption efforts, the illicit financing and flows, as well as the use of the AI techniques. So there are all these different ways to interfere our cognition, our minds. And so how should we respond? Because one of the questions is really looking into these cognitive insecurities, where perhaps the responses which are frequently mentioned are through the media literacy building, the education, the social tools that we have at our disposal. So where do we find the balance? And the question is about advantages and inconveniences of framing this also or as a security issue, knowing that there are all these different domains that you also outlined in the example of Armenia, for example, or Moldova, that have been exploited. So should the responses be so diverse as well? Should it be mostly security focused, or these other social educational tools?
Okay, thanks. I think these are very important questions, and I think it's important to ask them not as just one off, but keep asking them. We should never lose sight of this. And on sort of the comparative advantages of framing this and disadvantages of framing this as a security issue, I think it's at the same time familiar but still very relevant question. Of course, framing something as a security issue can be helpful. It draws attention. It can draw resources. It makes possible enforcement where necessary. It makes possible application of these sort of exceptional measures where needed. But there are also risks, of course. The risk of going too far in terms of diminishing liberties that these security policies are actually meant to protect, right? If we suspend liberties, it goes on. We are at a constant risk to forget what we are actually to protect. And my sense is that Russia sort of tries to exploit this kind of short-termedness of our memory sometimes and make us actually dismantle our liberal polities, and this is the risk that we need to be constantly aware of and confront. Also, security should not sort of narrow our field of vision, because these challenges of cognition that we try to sort of give a name to under this framework of cognitive security go far beyond foreign interference and security. And I think at the core they sort of touch on what it means to be a citizen, in today's society. Ultimately, they may also address the question what it means to be human, in today's world. So I think we need this kind of holistic understanding and at the same time clarity. And the role of education here, of course, is key in the short term. In addition to this kind of common security picture that we should try to produce, I think we would definitely benefit, and there is still potential in more cooperation and coordination. Now we have the European Democracy Shield, as you mentioned, Nadia, which has this kind of resilience center as one of potential major, significant institutional innovations. So I think it's going to be important whether this really is done, and it brings this sort of added value to how we deal with these things. And we need to be serious about impact of technologies and regulate where necessary and do it well. So I would say that no easy task, but in a very short time frame that I have to answer.
No, absolutely. It's definitely not an easy task. And we indeed are talking about this at least since 2014 and even much before, perhaps in different type of clause or frameworks. But we keep expanding this discussion and understanding their depth a bit more as we see the evolution of the security landscape or the geopolitical or also the societal landscape. And here I want to go to the responses, right? And the realism in our responses, but also the impact, as you mentioned. How do we ensure that what we are developing, the responses we are devising, that are actually functioning and they are changing and improving the situation? And here we have question phrased as from Brussels. So here we have different tools. We have the toolboxes and FIMI and hybrid threats and cyber. We have now the new European Democracy Shield, which also is the momentum of our discussion. But we feel the urgency, right? And Ondrej, you refer to short-term and long-term measures that need to be combined, right? It's not either or, and it's not one security domain versus another, societal, human versus technology, etc. But what are the most urgent from the member state perspective? I'll move to you, Maria, because you in Sweden, you have this total defense, and you had already in your sleeve a couple of examples, like how do you do this, right? What specifically you're doing. So from the member state perspective, this urgency, these realistic steps that the EU and member state should prioritize to strengthen cognitive security, what are those? right? What is perhaps Sweden already prioritizing and doing to build this resilience against manipulation in this indeed very hybrid environment? If you can give us one or two examples that you find the most relevant, in addition to what you already mentioned through the exercises and this combination of different levels of cooperation within the member state. So the most realistic steps next, what we can learn from Sweden, or also what Sweden can do next, being already, championing on many fronts.
But I would like to start just to emphasize what you, Ondrej, highlighted, that I think Sweden, even though we are in the front in some perspectives, having a small population, but other challenges in our country, we can learn also from our other European colleagues that also have the same border and the same agitator on the other side. So, as you mentioned, I think the Black Sea, Moldova, for example, are great examples also where we try to support, but where we also can draw lessons identified from and try to implement in our own society and see whether there are the same patterns. If we see the same, which I believe we do during the games that we have conducted, both in the Black Sea region versus the High North and the northern part of Europe. A couple of concrete examples. There are many. It's so difficult, as you said also, Ondrej. We have to work in a short term and long term. We have to think in both horizontal and vertical perspectives. So this is really, really challenging. But we have to start somewhere. And I think one part that which I tried to really stress is that we do have now the tools, the framework, the fundament from both EU and NATO here. And without from that, we have tried to make it concrete for those who should be the defenders, our people, our children. And I would like to stress that in two concrete examples. One is that think if you have listened to me before, the brochure that was sent out to all the households in Sweden, first time 2018, and then new version 2025 in case of crisis or war, that gives a guidance, a concrete guidance of what the government does expect from you as an individual to prepare in. And there, the psychological defense and the cognitive sort of defense is also part of that. Another concrete decision that was made in Sweden was to implement this as a part of our education in school. So in every school in Sweden, from 9th grade and up, we implement a total defense subject for each and every one. And that includes the psychological defense, but also to teach and to inform children, young children, in what to do, how to detect, and how to combat this type of activities on social media, on the platforms where the youngsters are. But at the same time, as you said also, Ondrej, I want to come back to that, is a very, very sensitive balance on one hand, educate, on another hand, not to make people frightened and scared of the very situation we are in. So this is a balance where we, on one hand, moving quite fast, doing a lot of different practical actions in our society, but at the same time, we need to be very, very sensitive to also make sure that the population brings safety and security to the societies. I don't know whether this was something that could be, but I think information is very important, and that can be done in so many different ways, and you should use the whole toolbox to do so, but then also dare to say that this is also regional, it does differ. So looking in the high north in Sweden, Finland, and Norway, which is a combined area neighboring Russia, they have a different experience, and they have different languages that can also detect disinformation, fake news campaigns that we might not do in the same way in mid or south Sweden. So that is also something to really bear in mind, that you can have national campaigns, of course, but you also need to think of different regions, what their history, their culture, and their relation is.
No, absolutely. And speaking the right language to the audiences that are being targeted, to also help them defend and build this resilience is also important. So the language, then how we do it, and where we do it. You know, as you mentioned, you start as early as the 9th grade. Some recommendations go even earlier. But it is indeed not only the response on the issue of improving or enhancing our educational strategies, right? And the resilience. Let's move back to the other side of the coin as well, the legislation, the responsibilities of the government to protect the citizens. And we had even one of our first questions focusing on the implementation of the Digital Services Act. And you, Ondrej, you also mentioned the role of technology, how it really speeds up and scales up the process of this manipulation. Be it the European Democracy Shield or also the other discussions we are having on the regulatory measures, especially the legislation of the big tech or the companies. Where do you see that these new efforts, such as the European Democracy Shield, but also the implementation of the regulation we already had, plays a role? What should be done next now? Where are we with this protection also through these regulatory measures? And you can also mention other tools such as sanctions or others. Where do you see, do they work? Should we double down on them? Should we do the omnibus and try to deregulate, to simplify? What is your approach to make sure that we can move to the winning side to build this cognitive security?
Who would you like to answer the question?
You can give it a try, Ondrej. On the text front.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. I don't feel like I'm really an expert on the legislation there. I think, first of all, and I think this is the approach that partly it's a virtue out of necessity, partly it's just intrinsically recognized as good. I mean, we need to balance regulation with, let's say, promoting certain norms of acting in the virtual, in the digital arena. Working with the providers, working with the big tech. Of course, it can get politically very sensitive, as we are trying to protect our market, which is a very interesting market also for some other outside actors to be present at. So very broadly speaking, I think this should be the direction. But maybe let me just take the opportunity also to address one of the questions that is asked about the alternative voices from civil society and media and state governments. And I think this is very important, even when it comes to the legislative process, because we are dealing, going back to my introductory remarks, with what I see as a sort of a fundamental challenge, and Russia's efforts to undermine our political orders. You know, it's just one element of that. So if we are to find, you know, a balanced but also efficient solution to all sort of the facets of this challenge, we need some sort of rather not a major overhaul of, you know, how we do certain things. And this, if it's done without really thinking through about what sort of impact it can have on various constituencies and groups, and it was mentioned before, you know, the variety, you know, that even, you know, within a single member state, perhaps, you know, we need to be mindful of the different sort of circumstances and contexts. then the policy inevitably will not be a very good one. And ultimately, I think what makes us strong and what we should preserve and secure is, of course, individual citizens against sort of the security threats which can bring them harm. But also we need to protect kind of the space of the political debate and the pluralism, which I think is our greatest strength.
Thank you, Ondrej, for trying to address multiple questions in your response, and coming also back to this civil society, because we do know that these issues of cognitive security or cognitive warfare have been really perceived more from the military perspective from the start. So I want to give you a chance also, Maria, because you did mention this importance of the combination of cooperation on these issues of psychological defense between civilian and military groups, parts of our society, the approaches that we have, the frameworks that we are building. So just very briefly, where do you see, why does it matter for us to really be able to comprehend these issues from both perspectives? Is it because of the dual use of technologies, or because we have learned, as you said, from the Second World War, certain lessons, and now it is really important that we combine these civilian approaches and also these military and, perhaps other security tools that we have. So from the Swedish perspective and the examples you mentioned, the exercises as well, the role of EU and NATO cooperation, where do you see this need helping to build this cognitive resilience through the civilian military combined efforts?
I think try to work in this environment and with the psychological sort of and cognitive sphere. I believe that you need to use all the tools that you can absolutely have in your toolbox at the same time, in jointly and combined. So the military has their toolbox with a lot of tools that are of great use for the civilian side. But on the civilian side, you should not forget the importance of the private sector that has looking into, for example, critical infrastructure. And a lot of the critical infrastructure has private owners, as they have also to be involved. So a combination of the private and civilian and the military side is essential to really get the whole toolbox that we need to combat, detect, and deter our adversary. And I also want to underline in this regard the role of the military, looking into Sweden, where the military should support the civilian side in terms of peacetime crisis, where in wartime the civilian side shall support the militaries to do their job. So in this way, we are already interlinked. We need to be interlinked, and we need to understand each other in a much greater way to be efficient in this regard, because the military sometimes can detect early, and on the other hand, as I mentioned before, people living close to the border or are in environments can detect and also be a very strong support in this regard. So the civil military private combination is the three-part collaboration that is needed.
Thanks so much. And as we are really reaching the end of our conversation, before concluding, just to give you a chance, is there anything you want to respond to this, Ondrej? Or no, we have really exploited, I think, the conversation across many domains, across different terms and strategies and the tools that we have. And as our brief has promised, I hope we managed to clear some smoke and also see through some mirrors of these cognitive security challenges and opportunities that we see there. We are on our democratic journey, and the fight and the efforts continue. Multiple actors and multiple regions, multiple domains. And we hope this conversation stays alive. Do not hesitate for everyone who is watching us to reach out to us if you wish to discuss further on these issues, and stay tuned because we will continue sharing our views on the topic with you as well. So thank you, Maria. Thank you, Ondrej, for your excellent insights. And thank you everyone who was watching us, and wish everyone a nice afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nadia.